Hey, welcome to week 9. We're going to talk about participation, campaigns, and elections today. So, political participation refers to a lot of political activities, goes way beyond voting. So, for example, beyond voting, there's volunteering to work on a campaign, working for a political organization or a specific political candidate or topic or issue that you care about. You can contact public officials, you can go to town halls, you can go to forums, get involved with local political action committees. So you could sign a petition, you could attend a campaign event, a rally, a fundraiser. You can hang out campaign signs, you can do protests, you can do demonstrations. Uh, I myself have been involved in many of these types of efforts about topics or issues that really matter to me. Often this requires a lot more time than just voting. Voting is actually a fairly straightforward and simple process if you don't necessarily count getting informed about the issues. But if you get involved in an actual campaign or signs or demonstrations or decide you want to run for an office, it's going to require more time, effort, and contributions, your money. Also, for much of US history, fewer Americans have exercised their right to vote than have actually participated in a protest. So I think it's important to note that peaceful protests are protected by the First Amendment. We could discuss at some length, I think, what really involves a peaceful protest. I think that would be worthy of an entire semester of discussion that would be thoroughly enjoyable. Not We don't have time today, but there's all kinds of movements going on currently. We've had movements on both sides of women's health issues, climate issues. We've had a lot of conversation regarding foreign wars, both sides of those conflicts and wars. The most recent protest that I saw was the closure of a local elementary school. Probably the smallest protest I've ever seen was an elderly fellow out in front of the local municipal pool complaining about the 25-cent cost increase. I've driven to Las Vegas and seen entire major thoroughfares in Vegas shut down that even closed down interstates. So it goes way beyond Idaho, but I think we should value our right to speak up and our right to our First Amendment protections to peacefully protest. So those are ways that you can actually get involved beyond voting. Uh, our digital political participation has surged. So the internet and social media have become one of the biggest tools that we use for political participation. Citizens have greater access to political information than they've ever had before based on the internet accessibility to good and bad information, and it provides potential for community building. Um, Note that I said potential for community building. Sometimes that doesn't actually happen. Sometimes it can tear down communities, but it does allow for other ways to get involved besides just voting, and some of those that may cost money or a significant amount of time. Um, but all of these are used to try to influence politics. Uh, so you can go to a candidate's website. I do that all the time. There's votesmart.org, for example, where you can go on and you can look at candidates and you can compare candidates and you can see how they're scored by different organizations. You can get involved in organizing events. Online petitions can be signed. You can share stories. You can share experiences that you've had with candidates. You can actually follow a candidate and get updates about how they're doing with their campaign and fundraising. Social connections are also important to political participation. So social media is one way that we have used that's become a key networking tool for politicians and for issues and interest groups and political organizations. I've listed a couple that I think are really current and recent. We see a lot of movement on TikTok, Reddit, X, True Social, Blue Sky. Uh, there's a lot. We have some benefits of digital political participation that encourages information gathering and interaction just among users and elected officials. You can sign up for newsletters and have local officials send you their what they're working on. It's also been associated with an increased likelihood of voting. So the more people know and the more they're active, the more likely they are to vote, to attend these events, to go to campaign meetings, to donate money, be volunteers, and they tend to have more political knowledge overall. Voting, however, is the traditional form of political participation and probably the most important political act for most Americans. It is the one that actually counts at the end. That's how we genuinely and truly know at the end how people are feeling. So U.S. voter turnout nationally is, I would suggest, relatively low, in the 60 percentile range. In presidential elections, the number tends to go up. So you could ask yourself, what does this mean in the actual support of a candidate? I mean, think about it. If only 60% of the people turn out to vote, okay, so think about this. If only 60% of the people turn out to vote and only 50% of those people vote for a candidate, you're kind of looking at about like 30% of the people supporting a candidate. So I'm not sure that is saying that we have tremendous mandates or supports for candidates. And we're going to talk about this some more here in just a minute. But stop and think about what this means, okay? So, for example, in 2024, in the presidential election, President Trump won by 49.8% of the votes cast. So he didn't get even a majority of the votes cast. And again, even less than 60%, or about 60-something% of people turned out. So think about it. When people claim that they have a mandate, that mandate would be amongst the people who actually showed up and voted, and it doesn't have to be even 50%. If it's not a year of a presidential election, the numbers are even significantly lower. And we're going to talk about primary elections, and the turnout rate for primary elections is even more abysmal. I apologize. I don't know what happened to these charts. They were in our book. They're in your book. So if you look in your book, I believe it's figure 9.2 in your book, and I'm not sure. It's just disappeared. But anyway, in your book, it shows a range from 1892 to 2022. It shows that about the average is 67%. That comes and goes. Anyway, so it's just what we've talked about earlier. So let's look at some of these other factors. Socioeconomic status. That is the number one determinant of whether or not someone's going to vote. So I'm going to repeat that. Socioeconomic status is the number one indicator of whether people are going to vote. So white Caucasians with college degrees have a tendency to vote Democrat. They tend to vote for the Democratic candidates. They tend to vote more often. Those with less of a college degree tend to vote Republican, but I would argue that that's not necessarily accurate, and I don't know that the 2024 information is going to bear that out. We're still waiting for some of that information to come in. But there's also some other very important predictors of who's going to vote. And I'm just going to say this. Older people are more likely to vote. People over age 65, I'd even argue 55 and older, they're voters. They tend to vote. So those aged 18 to 34 has increased somewhat, but not significantly. It's increased from about 49% in 2016. Like I said, those numbers are still coming out, but those numbers are still relatively low compared to the number of people that are 65 and older. 74% or higher turn out to vote. Why? Why do older people vote? Well, they want to make sure that nobody is messing with what is important to them, specifically things like Social Security and Medicare, they just tend to vote more. So I'm just going to say this. You need to get out and vote. You need to get out and vote, because these are the people that are going to represent you for a long time, and the decisions that they make are going to represent you for a long, long time. Okay. You get the opportunity to choose about who's making the laws and rules for you. So think about it. What do you have to gain and what do you have to lose? I'm going to tell you that my very elderly mother never misses. She's 100% voter, but she's not going to live with the consequences of how she votes for very long. You're going to live with how my mom votes for the rest of your life. So I'm just going to say, she doesn't care about college tuition. If you do, I would suggest you vote. She's 100% voter. Okay. So who votes? Race and ethnicity matters. Whites tended to be the majority of voters currently in the United States elections. We're starting to see a tremendous growth in African American voters, and that would be on both Republicans and Democrats. Latinos and Hispanics are the fastest growing minority group. We're starting to see a steady increase in their voting, and Asian Americans tend to vote very similar to Latinos and Hispanics. Okay, let's look at gender. Women. Women register at the same rate as men, but they are more likely to vote than men. In the political party realm, women are much more likely to vote for Democratic, about 10% more. They vote more often in all elections, not just presidential elections. But just an important note, women do tend to vote more than men. The religious identity comes into play. Many religious groups provide an infrastructure for political participation. So they may allow their buildings to be used for voting. They may allow candidates to come and speak. They may provide buses for members of their congregations to go and vote or register to go vote. And the white evangelicals are a cohesive force currently within the Republican Party, have been for a long time. African American leaders have a history of playing a really important role historical role in politics, because they tend to interact with their congregations about issues that are important to their population. The political environment helps us to understand individual behavior. If you remember, we've talked about political mobilization when we talk about what do parties do. They mobilize people to get voters to the polls. They mobilize people to get them out and actually voting. So mobilization is this process by which large numbers of people are organized for some kind of a political activity, okay? Whether it's face-to-face, interaction is always part of that competition or a lack thereof. There tends to be a higher turnout in more competitive elections. I'm not sure why people find presidential elections to be more competitive. For example, in Idaho, governor elections are in those off-year elections. I would say that they tend to be very competitive, but they just tend to have lower voter turnout. Sometimes a really controversial ballot issue or initiative can increase turnout. Not always, but it generally can increase some of the turnout. Also, if you start looking at laws within states, you can see that although they vary state by state, some states really don't make it easy for people to vote. So it can reduce their turnout. And I don't have a chart in here, but I challenge you to go and look at, if you're interested in Idaho actually, if that's the state you're interested, Idaho actually has a really good voter turnout rate. That's not true across the country. So, in fact, Idaho's been working on changing some of their voter registration laws and absentee ballot laws. So something for you to be familiar with. But we do know that registration laws tend to have the greatest influence as far as restricting voter laws for people who are younger, less educated, less affluent. I will tell you college students have a very difficult time getting out and voting, and they have not made that very easy for college students. And I know that from personal experience. Voting by mail seems to have boosted voting in a lot of places, although there's questions about that now. But changes in voting laws after 2020 have generally made it more difficult for people to vote. Some states have made it, like I said, very difficult. They'll only let you register to vote like on the fourth Wednesday of the month. They'll give 1 day for people to vote, or I mean, to get registered to vote. If you actually look at these laws, you note that registration requirements, again, vary state by state. They tend to be greatest, again, like I said, on people who are younger. At a practical level, it requires voters to prove generally some form of identity, a driver's license or some kind of a voter ID. That is in like 36 states. 8 states require an actual photo ID to vote. And Republicans argue that these laws are needed to prevent voter fraud. The Democrats argue conversely that these laws are designed to specifically alienate and disenfranchise voters. But I will tell you, that the research shows that voter fraud is virtually non-existent. It is never, that we are aware of, affected any election outcome. I'm not saying that it's never occurred. Intentional voter fraud is different than accidental voter fraud, but do we have massive voter fraud or evidence of massive voter fraud? The answer to that is no. Okay. We have no evidence, again, that it's actually changed an election, and it can very much affect racial minorities who may not have access to transportation to get to voting booths, especially if the hours are limited. I will tell you that the elderly frequently have a difficult time having something like a driver's license if they no longer drive and live in a senior assisted living center, for example. But again, college students, because they may have moved, may find themselves very, very challenged to get in and actually cast their vote. Okay, so how do voters decide who to vote for? There's 3 major factors that influence voters' decisions at the polls. Okay, three factors. First, partisan loyalty. Are you loyal to your political party? Okay. It tends to assert itself in like less visible races. You can cast a ballot for candidates that they believe align with their own values. Okay. The economy. It's the economy, stupid. Okay. The economy is the #1 reason that people say they vote. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you, the economy is the #1 issue, always. It's just been consistently the economy. So it's the deciding factor. So if you've got candidate characteristics, candidates, race, ethnicity, religion, gender that line up with you, a geographical background, social background that you recognize or agree with, that can influence how you vote or how a person votes and how the public perceives that candidate. There's been a lot of talk about the age of candidates, maybe the gender of the candidate or the religion or the moral character of those candidates. All of those things play a role. Okay, so let's talk about elections, general elections, for example. I'm going to shift. The primary election. Okay, so there's 2 basic elections. Okay, the general election is the election that's held in November. Okay, so we have 3 different types that I want to talk about when it comes to the other election. So the general is in November. Really important and often overlooked is primary elections. Okay, so there are different kinds of primary elections. In Idaho right now, in the Republican Party, they have a closed primary. Only people that are registered Republicans are allowed to participate in their primary election. An open primary is when everyone can vote and you have a ballot that has all the candidates listed. And then there are caucuses. Um, and caucuses are a little more complicated. Uh, there's a video that talks about caucuses in this week's lesson that I recommend. But it's kind of a coming together, and they can talk and they can discuss. For example, the Democrats, it's open and people can work to try to influence people to vote a certain way, and then there's others where people just write it down and put it away quietly. So there's closed primaries, there's open primaries, and there are caucuses. And right now, wow, Idaho has had all three last year. So we're an interesting study. Our primary elections tend to be in May, and then the general election is in November. So the primary narrows down who is going to ultimately be elected to office in November. Okay. And then we have what's called midterm elections. And midterm would be the middle of the presidential campaign. So, or I mean, the office of the president. So when the president is elected to 4 years, it would be in 2024, we had a presidential election. 2026 is a midterm. 2028 is a presidential election. So 2030 will be another midterm. Okay. And these are elections that don't coincide or match up with a presidential election. So we call them off term. We call them non-presidential, but I would call them a midterm election. Okay. Direct democracy. I'm going to talk about initiatives and referendums, and this process exists in 26 states. Idaho is one of them. We have initiatives and referendums. So a ballot initiative, think of it. The voters have taken the initiative, okay, to go out and get signatures to get a proposed law on the ballot so the rest of the state can vote on it, or interest groups can do it. Generally, it's more of an interest group or a large coalition of people that are interested in a similar issue that they want to see on the ballot. Okay. A referendum, however, is a proposed law by the legislature that is referred to the public for voters' approval or rejection. So a referendum is going to come from the legislature, and an initiative is going to be initiated by the citizens of the state. Okay, more forms of direct democracy. So we've got what's called recalls, and you know what, I'm sure you're familiar with what a recall election is, which allows voters to remove a state or a local official, like a school board member, a city council member, somebody elected like a secretary of state or something from office before their term is over. This is not an option at the federal level. This is only at the state and local level. 20 states currently allow it. 20 states allow a state recall, and 30 states allow state and local. So there's a percentage, and each of these are different, about what that threshold has to be for someone to actually be recalled, and what it takes to get that petition successful for that recall vote. Okay, presidential party nominations. Okay, so parties conduct a month-long, and it seems like it goes on a very long time, but generally starts in January of the year of the presidential election. Okay, and this is when these political parties organize themselves and do this months-long process of picking who their presidential nominee is going to be. Okay, so like I said, Idaho's is in May, or these caucuses, okay, where they're picking who their person is going to be that's going to go to their national convention in the summer. So this can be called front loading. There's a front loading problem. So for example, Idaho's in May, but a lot of other states have their primaries, for example, the first week or second week of January. Well, frequently, the people that are going to be the presidential nominees are already decided before it even gets to Idaho. So that's front loading, and these states kind of compete to try to be up at the front so they can have more influence, but There's a lot of rules and regulations that the political parties have made around that issue, but you should just know that front loading is a competition, and it's a bit of an issue. Okay, so then they choose delegates or people that will go to these national conventions, and they put together something that would be called, and this happens at the state level as well. They put together a party platform, which just says this is the philosophy of our party, this is the principle of our party, this is what our positions are going to be, and they tend to advocate for these philosophies, principles, and positions at these conventions. So they just put them together. They share this. It doesn't always happen, but that's generally the case. And you can certainly look up what your state platform is, and you can look up and see what the national party platform is. Okay, so becoming a presidential voter technically means picking electors for the general election, okay? So when we vote for president, we don't vote directly for president. We're actually voting for someone called an elector, okay? And they would be the person who goes and votes in the electoral college in the first part of December, okay? And these electors will actually select who the president is. When we vote in the general election, when you vote again and you vote in that election, look at the ballot, because it will have, in Idaho, we have 4 electors, and it will give you the names of who it is that you're actually voting for, okay? So why does Idaho have 4 electors? Because we have 2 members of the House and we have 2 senators. So it's just really simple math, a very simple formula. Idaho has 4 electors. We have 2 senators, 2 representatives, therefore we have 4 votes for president. California has 55. They have 53 members in the House and they have 2 senators. Therefore, they have 55 electoral votes for president. Overall, there are 538 total electors, and the winning candidate just needs a simple majority of 270 to become president. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened to all of my graphs, but it's in the book. Okay, so I apologize. It's just deleted them all. Okay, so campaigns are marathons. Modern political campaigns are very complex, and the key factor is whether there is an incumbent in the race. So again, the incumbent is the person who is currently holding office, running for re-election. These campaigns need generally a professional campaign manager to kind of run all of the ins and outs and the nuts and bolts of it. They generally need a treasurer that tracks campaign contributions, and really successful candidates have a great organization, and some call it a machine in place, but to be successful, that they're well organized. Okay. So we're going to pause right here and start in to the next video. Okay, let's start with part 2. We're going to jump in again with chapter 9 and start right off. Okay, so we have 6 sources of funding for campaigns. Okay, we have individual donors, we have political action committees, which we've talked a little bit about before, PACs and super PACs. We have something that's called a 501c4 entity. We have political parties. We have public money if the candidate chooses it. And then we actually have the candidate themselves and the amount of money that they can put in. So let's look at individual donors, okay? Individual donors are limited to a specific amount, okay? There's some figures here. So $3,300 per candidate, per election, per person. So like a couple could each put in their own $3,300. You can donate $5,000 per PAC per year. You can see how much per committee. So this just breaks it down for you. There's no I mean, you can find all kinds of different ways to donate significant amounts of money. Okay, so sources of campaign funds. So these political action committees tend to be established by corporations, labor unions, interest groups, or other types of advocacy groups. And their purpose is to channel their contributions from their members to these political campaigns that they're invested in. So a contribution from a PAC is limited. Okay, there's limits on how much, but there are no limits on independent expenditures. Okay, so means that if you're spending it outside of the campaign, not like if you're spending money and doing things outside of the campaign, there is no limit. But if you're giving money to that campaign, there's a limit. Okay, you're just spending it on their behalf, for example. Okay. Well, you're working it, you're spending or donating that money for that candidate on some other way to further their goals. Okay, so you can't necessarily coordinate that. Okay, you're just trying to find ways that you can make your money have the most impact by spreading it in as many ways as you can possible. So nearly 2/3 of all of these PACs, this is really good information for you to know. Nearly 2/3 of all PACs represent corporations, not necessarily from the United States, trade associations. And when I say not outside, a lot of corporations are maybe based in the United States, but they also have outside interests. So I want to make sure that I'm telling you this is on the up and up. But corporations don't tend to just be U.S. Oriented. Trade associations, so there's other professional groups and businesses that are involved. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, these groups engage by making independent expenditures. No contributions may be to a candidate. Okay, so there's no limit or a donation spent by a super PAC. Super PACs can spend as much as they want, but they have to disclose who their donors are. So people who contribute to what we call like an SPAC, a special PAC, okay, or a super PAC, not a special, who donates to an SPAC or a super PAC, they're required to give who those donors are, and those donors are required to be reported publicly. Okay, this is an important note. 501c4s, okay? That's an IRS code. That 501c4 is referencing an IRS code, okay? There are no disclosure requirements for people who donate to 501c4 groups, okay? These groups are anonymous. You've probably heard of that term dark money that you hear about. Well, this is where that comes from. These 501c4s seem to be where that term dark money comes from. You can give as much money as you want to a 501c4 and you do not have to report who gave it to you, okay? You do not have to report who those dark money donors are. Those are anonymous, okay? If you can't give money, if these certain individuals can't give money directly to a campaign or to a candidate, and they don't want to coordinate and they don't want it to go to, for example, a super PAC and have it reported, they want to keep it on the download, they would do it through a 501c4, okay? So 501c4 entities do have a limit, okay? But their political activities cannot be the primary purpose of their entity. A 501c4 cannot be created just to hide money for a political purpose. It has to have some other reason, according to the IRS, to exist, okay? They are tax-exempt entities, and their requirement is less than 50% of their activities can have something to do with political, to deal with political activities, okay? But again, this is what they call dark money, and they don't necessarily have to say where they got their money from. The Federal Election Campaign Act, okay, only deals with presidential elections. It provides for public, or in other words, government funding of presidential campaigns. As you file your tax return, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed it, but up at the top, there's a place where you can check mark a box so you can put like a little bit of money. I think it's like $3 that you would donate in taxes towards presidential campaigns. It goes into a separate fund. And it's used just specifically for presidential campaigns. So if threshold is donations is met, a candidate can apply for these matching funds from the government on a dollar to dollar basis. Okay. And they can get a lump sum of about, like, I think $103.7 million. Yeah, $103.7 million. That's what it was. But there's a disadvantage to taking this money. Okay. Third parties must receive at least five. Well, okay, so just a minute. There's a third party disadvantage. So let me just go back. The problem for third parties is if they don't have at least 5% of the popular vote in the last presidential election, their candidate won't be eligible for this money. Okay. So there is a disadvantage to this particular pot of funding. But this money hasn't been used since 2008, because if a candidate uses or wants to raise more money than this limit, they can't. So they can't use both this public money and private money both. Okay. So, for example, President Obama came back and said, I'm going to exceed, I'm going to have more money privately than this will allow me. So since 2008, since President Obama, candidates have said, nope, I can fundraise much more money than this Federal Election Campaign Act money will allow. Okay, candidates' personal funds. Candidates are free to spend their own money, and they can spend as much as they want. They can spend an unlimited amount of money on their campaign. Okay, this comes from a Supreme Court, Buckley versus Valeo. Okay, they said that money is speech, and it allows unlimited spending by a candidate on their own campaign. Okay, so let's just cap this, and it's going to be relatively quick here. Let's look at the 2024 presidential primaries. There really wasn't much of a primary issue. It was kind of like incumbent versus incumbent in a way. Former President Donald Trump was the nominee. He wasn't really an incumbent, but in a way, it was kind of like an incumbent. And then the Democrats had an incumbent president, Joe Biden. But then in July of 2027, he stepped away, or in July of 2024, he stepped away. Kamala Harris stepped in. She hadn't won any of the primaries. So 2024, I would suggest, is an anomaly. It's one for the history books. And what are the results? There were 155 million votes cast. Okay. That was just a little over 66% of eligible voters, which was down. That is down 2.5% than the number of people who voted in 2020. It's the second highest turnout since 1900, but is still second. Just know that Democrats generally are more likely to vote by mail or vote early. Republicans tend to vote more in person, but I would say that was more close in 2024. And interestingly, I've says 5 states, but I believe this is 8 states. These are 8 states that are vote by mail only. I should have fixed that, because that's been changing. We'll see how popular it is. There's questions about the honesty of mail-in voting, but there are 8 states listed there, not 5. Okay. So Trump secured the victory. He had 77.3 million votes, and with an electoral college vote of 312. There's the map. I know sometimes it's difficult, because if you look, it looks like the map is heavily red. The issue is some of those blue states have a significant, that's not even accurate. Okay, Florida did not go blue. I'm not sure why ABC News had this wrong, but I can tell you Florida did not go blue. Man, I'm struggling today. I apologize. Anyway, what else was the end result? Republicans have a slight majority in the House of Representatives, and they also hold a slight majority in the Senate. So they are currently the party majority in all 3 in the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. And just to wrap this up, remember the importance of critical thinking. Okay, with all the voices that we hear, it's essential that we remember to take the time, make the effort, use your critical thinking skills. Okay, what's real, who, what, why, when, how, why. Why is this important? Okay, and answer the questions should be based, your answers to your questions should be valid and verifiable facts, not simply opinion. Okay, if somebody's telling you that the sky is green and the clouds are orange and the grass is purple, does not make it so. Okay. Repetition of falsehoods does not make it true. And just to kind of reflect on the last election, the economy, again, was the most important factor to voters. There were ongoing concerns about voter security. Women were, again, the majority of the electorate. What was different? Swing states shifted from Biden to Trump. What I'm going to ask you to watch in the next 2 years is, will the Senate or the House shift during those midterm elections? Will it still be border? Will it still be the economy? Anyway, so that wraps us up for this chapter.